U.S. firms spend about $16 billion a year on information about consumer demand. Why is this information so valuable? Because it helps firms understand what consumers like you want to buy. Firms also use information on demand to predict what would happen if they offered new products or changed their prices, like Apple often does with the iPhone pictured here. Governments care about demand too. It tells them, for example, whether a tax on unhealthy food would cause consumers to buy a little less or a lot less. That's just the beginning of what an understanding of demand means to participants in the economy. At the core of that understanding is what we call the law of demand, and that will be the focus of this module. So in this module, the key idea that you are going to focus on is that when the price of a good or service increases, consumers buy less of it for two specific reasons. Number one, they substitute the good with other goods whose prices have not increased. And number two, their income will buy less of the good at the higher price. This is the explanation behind the law of demand. And so the objectives that we'll accomplish in this module are the following. First, I will describe and define the law of demand and the role of both the substitution effect and the income effect that were described in the key idea. Second, I will explain what economists mean by the phrase, all else equal. And finally, I'll show the relationship between what we call a demand schedule and what we call a demand curve. Now, you know that purchases of AccuView contact lenses rose when the price fell. But it's also true that when the price of contact lenses rises, purchases fall because some consumers are unwilling or unable to pay the higher price. This illustrates a central principle of economics. A change in the price of a good affects what we call the quantity demanded of that good. In economics, the term quantity demanded has a special meaning. It is the amount of a good that consumers are willing and able to purchase at a particular price over a given period of time. Now, there are two components to this particular question. Notice that the quantity demanded is just not how much of the good you want. You have to be both willing and able to buy that quantity. For example, if you love going to concerts, you might want to attend a dozen or more every month. But because your income is limited and concert tickets are expensive, you might be unwilling or unable to buy more than one every few months. Your quantity demanded at a particular price is the number of tickets you are willing to pay for and can actually afford at that price. So even if you love live music, your quantity of concert tickets demanded is zero at every price you cannot afford to pay. So there are two parts of this question. Number one, you have to be willing to afford to pay for something. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is that you have to be able to pay for something. Both parts of this have to be true in order for you to demand something. If you have the money to be able to afford something, but you're not willing to spend the money on it, then there is no quantity demanded. So if both of those are true, if you're both willing and able to purchase the price, so the other part has to be true as well. Maybe you're willing to spend the money on something, but if you are not able to because you don't have the money, then you're not demanding it either. So you have to be both willing and able to purchase something at a particular price to demand it. Demand is not want. Demand means willing and able. That means if it's sold at that price, then you will actually buy it at that price. Now, if we go back to the previous screen, okay, if you look at this figure here, a rise in the price leads to a fall in the quantity demanded, and a fall in the price leads to a rise in the quantity demanded. This is one of those commonly observed behaviors that economists call laws, like the law of increasing opportunity cost you learned about in the first chapter. The tendency for the price and the quantity demanded to move in opposite directions is known as the law of demand. Now, there are two distinct reasons why a consumer buys less of a good after its price increases. One is called the substitution effect, and the other is called the income effect. So let's take a look at those. Suppose your meals consisted of a combination of $1 tacos and $2 burritos. The opportunity cost of each burrito would be 2 tacos, because the $2 spent on a burrito could otherwise buy 2 tacos for $1 each. If the price of burritos rose to $3, you would then have to give up 3 tacos for each burrito. At the same time, the price rise for burritos would lower the opportunity cost of tacos. Instead of giving up a burrito for every 2 tacos, you would give up a burrito for every 3 tacos. The higher burrito price would thus give you reason to substitute more tacos, whose opportunity cost has fallen, for some burritos whose price and opportunity cost have risen. The tendency for consumers to switch away from a good whose price has risen and toward other goods that have become relatively less expensive is known as the substitution effect. This effect helps explain why a rise in the price of movie tickets causes consumers to buy fewer tickets and instead rent more DVDs or download more movies. The substitution effect also explains why some commuters switch to public transportation, like buses and trains, when a rise in the price of gasoline makes it more expensive to drive a car. The substitution effect always causes consumers to buy less of a good whose price has increased and more of a good whose price has decreased. This is one of the reasons why consumer purchases follow the law of demand. Income has purchasing power, meaning that it gives people the power to buy things. When prices are low, a given amount of income will buy more things. It has greater purchasing power than when prices are high. For example, with an income of $100 per week, you can purchase 100 music downloads for $1 each. But if the price rises to $1.25, your income will have the power to buy only 80 downloads. This leads us to the second reason why a price increase causes a decrease in the quantity demanded. Because a price increase lowers the overall purchasing power of consumers' income. And this is what we call the income effect. Suppose that you currently spend half of your income on music downloads and the other half on food, clothing, and other goods. If the price of downloads suddenly doubles, you will essentially be poorer because your income will purchase less than it did before. After the price rises, you will not be able to afford the same combination of music and other goods as before. You will have to do some belt tightening and cut back on one or more of the goods you buy, most likely including music downloads. The change in consumption that results from the diminished purchasing power of your income is called the income effect. This effect is the same as if your income actually decreased and the prices stayed the same. There is an income effect in the other direction if the price falls. You will feel richer and you are likely to buy more of one or more goods. The income effect and the substitution effect have one thing in common. Each can be a reason why consumers buy less of a good when its price rises. So each plays a role in explaining why consumers follow the law of demand. It is important to distinguish between these two effects. The substitution effect of a price increase is the switch to other goods that have become a relatively good deal. The income effect of a price increase is the change in consumption that results from the decrease in the purchasing power of consumers' income. In a future module, we will explain that a normal good is one that you buy less of when your income decreases. This figure right here summarizes how each effect works when the price of a normal good rises or falls, and how the two effects combine to help explain the law of demand. When the price of a good rises, consumers tend to switch away from that good and buy more of other goods that have become relatively less expensive. This, of course, is known as the substitution effect. However, if we look at the income effect of a price increase, that is the change in consumption that results from the diminished purchasing power of income. Both the substitution effect and the income effect help explain why a consumer buys less of a good or service when the price rises. Imagine that the price of chocolate rises. We would expect a fall in the quantity demanded, but what if at the same time new research reveals surprising health benefits from eating chocolate? The price rise will discourage chocolate consumption, but the research will make people want to eat more chocolate. The net result could be either an increase or a decrease in the quantity of chocolate people buy. According to the law of demand, when the price of a good goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. And when the price of a good goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. This relationship applies only when we assume that other influences on the quantity demanded, such as people's taste for a good, are held constant or unchanged when the good's price changes. If the price changes and other influences change at the same time, then the law of demand might not hold. Economists use a Latin term, ceteris paribus, meaning all else equal, to indicate that they are looking only at a specified relationship, such as the one between price and quantity demanded. Ceteris paribus means that all other factors that might affect the relationship are held constant. In the real world, of course, everything else is not held constant. The price of a good may increase, and consumer tastes may change at the same time, as in our chocolate example. This does not strike down the law of demand. It just means that in the real world, price is not the only force affecting purchasing decisions. Nonetheless, understanding how the price of a good affects the quantity demanded without interference from other factors is quite useful. In case the all else equal assumption gives you a headache, let's seek clarification and relief by thinking about aspirin. We know that aspirin can reduce a fever, that is, if other influences on body temperature are held constant. If you start running around after taking an aspirin, your fever might actually rise. Even so, it is useful to isolate the effect of aspirin on body temperature by saying that, all else equal, taking aspirin reduces your temperature. Knowing this is important to those treating a fever. In the same way, it is important to isolate the effect of price changes on the quantity demanded. It helps us understand how markets work and how different policies and events are likely to influence a market.